Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
We all know about the brilliant successes in the arts and sciences, but if you knew all their stories, you might find that some of the failures were really more interesting. It was Pat Weiss speaking. The beer had given out and Carl Vanderkock had gone out to get some more. Pat, having cornered all the chips in sight, was leaning back and emitting vast clouds of smoke. That means, I opined, that you've got a story coming. Okay, spill it. The poker can wait.
Those were the opening paragraphs of Hyperpilosity, a short story by author L. Sprague de Camp.
And we're going to cover it here on Strange Studies of Strange Stories. Happy New Year! I'm Chris Lackey.
And I'm Chad Pfeiffer. This is our free show for the month of January 2025. We are in the future.
Yes, we've got a lot of great stories planned for this year, so please subscribe on Patreon.
You know, even though this show has remained more or less the same since we started it a decade and a half ago, we like to keep up with the times. And in that spirit, I have just made a massive investment in some AI that's going to help us out around here.
I thought you were kind of skeptical about the whole AI thing.
Well, yeah, but okay, so you remember that guy, Lewis? The one who sold me the weighted blanket?
Yeah.
And then I found out it was heavy just because Lewis was hiding in the blanket?
Right.
Well, we've made up. And he's really turned his life around.
Yeah.
He's been going to computer school. And the way he says it, you know, he's just really taken to it. He's created a new AI robot for us. I got it right here.
Oh, wow.
Hello, Chad and Chris. I am the new AI robot man for the podcast.
You bought that?
Yes. Well, I didn't buy. I'm not crazy. I didn't buy it. It's a subscription plan.
Oh, dear. I'm confused. So you actually have a physical robot in your home right now?
Yes. This isn't like ChatGPT or one of those things that's like, you know, if you buy it, you can't have it or see it. This I actually have. It's like a retro junkyard look.
Okay.
Kind of. It looks like a guy in a bunch of cardboard boxes is what it looks like. But that's cool. That's like the skin.
Uh-huh.
You can call me Al. It stands for Artificial Intelligence. Lynn for short. You can also call me Lynn.
Wow. Yeah.
Al,
So
Lynn, whatever you want.
That's cutting edge.
It's cutting edge stuff, and you can get apparently there are other things. You can do the cardboard box look I'm using now, but there's other things you can get, other skins like a suit of armor.
Okay.
Various things like that, a chair. So anyway, final test of Al or Lynn, our new AI bot. Who was that reader we heard at the top?
Computing. Why, that was James Holloway.
Oh my gosh, he's right.
See?
Wow, okay. Our reader is James Holloway. When he's not talking monsters on his podcast, Monster Man, he is making cool gaming pamphlets. Check out Tome of Tombs, Guide to Grunts, and Pamphlet of Pantheons, to name only a few.
Wow, he is the Thomas Paine of gaming pamphlets.
That reference is to founding father Thomas Paine, the author of the influential pamphlet Common Sense, which caused a sensation and was a contributing factor to the American Revolution.
How about that?
Yeah.
We're getting notes from Al.
That is pretty impressive.
The box in the middle lights up when that happens, like almost like there's someone in there looking at a phone. That's just a way to describe it. It's like that.
So, okay, so it's big enough, this shape, to have a human inside of it.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, sure. But I think that's the battery light I'm seeing.
This is only the second De Camp story that we've covered, the first being The Command in episode 86 of the show.
That was the hyper-intelligent bear story where the main character bear used his advanced bear intelligence to pop open a guy's head with his bear claws.
Yes.
I loved it. And we've referenced De Camp on and off over the years as well.
Just a quick bio recap. De Camp was born in New York City in 1907. He's mostly known for being a sci-fi fantasy author, but he was also an accomplished engineer, having degrees from Caltech and Stevens Institute of Technology.
All right.
I knew him from his somewhat notorious 1975 Lovecraft A Biography, which wasn't all that accurate. He's also known for writing more Conan stories, doing a bit of a August Derleth with Robert E. Howard.
And he also put together that fake Necronomicon that you and I fell for back in the day. If we'd had the AI robot with us, that never would have happened.
That's right.
Sprague de Camp is part of that generation of science fiction writers that were kind of herded together by John Campbell when he became editor of Astounding Stories in the mid-1930s. We're talking Asimov, Heinlein, Fritz Leiber, C.L. Moore, Theodore Sturgeon. You know, he was in there with all of those authors.
Yep.
Don't forget L. Ron Hubbard.
That's true.
Wow. This robot is
true, Lynn.
actually really helpful.
A lot of things about Scientology make sense, actually.
All right. Nope. I take it back.
Don't know about that.
This story, Hyperpilosity, was first published in the April 1938 issue of Astounding Science Fiction.
A few weeks ago, I grabbed a copy of The Best of Sprague de Camp at The Book Deal, which is my favorite used bookstore here. And this was the first story in the book.
Oh.
I also, that day, grabbed an omnibus of science fiction from 1980. And once again, this was one of the first stories.
Oh.
So I thought, oh, okay, the universe is trying to tell me to read Hyperpilosity. By the way, this science fiction omnibus book is a big door stopper. I found out when I opened it up that it was a 21st birthday gift back in September of 1983.
Oh, wow.
And I know this because a person wrote an inscription on that date on the inside cover. I love finding little things like this when you buy a used book. It says, "For dear Sarah's 21st, precisely twice 21 stories of classic science fiction from nearly that many years before your arrival in their future, but whose reading makes them present and keeps their writers living ever after. Much love."
Wow.
I thought that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's get into the story.
It begins with some guys playing poker. One of the guys, Carl, leaves to get more beer, and our narrator, Pat Weiss, decides he's going to tell a story. He gets a little ribbed about his stories being long-winded, but once the naysayers shut up, Pat begins. And we get a pretty strong statement of the theme right at the top. We all know about the brilliant successes in the arts and sciences, but if you knew all of their stories, you might find that some of the failures were really more interesting.
That is true. History is written by the winners, but as far as stories go, things that come up short one way or another is where things get really interesting. Speaking of which, I always, when this topic comes up, I think about those poor inventors of flying machines that didn't quite work.
Yeah.
For like 200,000 years, humanity yearns to take to the sky, and it's just one failed invention after another as we slowly work out the concepts of aeronautics. Each bad device teaches us a little more. We get a little closer to the airplane. But like, if you happen to be one of those last failures, your experiments coincided with the advent of film, and this got recorded. So like, the legacy of the bicycle glider guy is not that he inched us toward modern air travel. This poor guy is the highlight reel for all of scientific failure.
It's true.
Sometimes for failure overall as a concept. If you mention failure, you real quick show a bunch of guys with bad flying machines crashing into the ground. But these are scientists. You know, they were trying. When Pat says some of the failures were really more interesting, like you can just see the highlight reel of black and white mustache people crashing their flying machines. And we're all laughing at them. Didn't those idiots know how to buy a plane ticket yet?
This story revolves around a virology scientist named J. Roman Oliveira. Pat says that Dr. Oliveira was top-notch, but he never got the recognition he deserved. So he became a teacher at a small college in Texas.
Some explanation about the J in his name. I first knew J. Roman when I was a mere student at the medical center, and he was a professor of virology. The J in his name stands for Jesus, spelled like Jesus, which is a perfectly good Mexican name, but he'd been so much kidded about it in the States that he preferred to go by Roman.
Pat says that he had Dr. Oliveira as a teacher during the 1971 flu epidemic. Wait a minute. This story was written in 1938.
Yes.
We have a tale from the future.
This poker game is happening in like 1985 or something like that. The mythical future, 1985. Says, you remember that great change is capitalized, which is what this story has to do with. Started in the winter of 1971 with that awful flu epidemic.
What was the great change? Robot workers? Silver foil clothing? We'll have to wait and see. One of the annoying things about this story is that we have some phonetic writing. Since Dr. Oliveira is Mexican, De Camp has written him using phonetic spelling to point out his thick Spanish accent.
Yeah, I had the same issue with the novelization for Zorro the Gay Blade, which is a book I read. But here I thought it was kind of okay because this narrator is telling the story at a poker game while they're waiting for more beer, meaning, you know, they've consumed all the beer that was there.
Yes.
even in the phonetic writing, the accent is a little inconsistent and bad. So I think it's a phonetic writing of somebody doing a bad Mexican accent.
Oh.
There's a sense of humor about the whole story, and I don't think we're meant to take anything or anybody too seriously in the narrative. The context of the wraparound, the fact that it's a drunken intermission of a poker game, I think is to allow for like a loose telling of these things without having to get into the hard science facts.
Yeah, that's a good take.
So we flash back to that flu epidemic. He says, Dr. Oliveira came down with the flu. I went around to see him to get an assignment and found him perched on a pile of pillows and wearing the awfulest pink and green pajamas. His wife was reading to him in Spanish. Listen, Pat, he said when I came in, I know you're a worthy student, but I wish you and the whole damn virology class were roasting in the hottest griddle in hell. Tell me what you want and then go away and let me die in peace.
While Pat is visiting with Dr. Oliveira, old Dr. Fogarty comes in to check on him. Stick around, Sonny, he said to me, and learn a little practical medicine. I've always thought it a mistake that we haven't had a class to train doctors in bedside manners. When Fogarty has Oliveira open his shirt, he can see that Oliveira has a very hairy chest, unusual for him as he's been quite hairless being a man of Native American blood. Pat says, hey, I got the flu last month, and I've got more body hair than I used to.
So Pat's had this happen to him too. There's a sudden correlation. This flu might be responsible for some hair growth. Both of these guys might have grown a little hair and also gotten the flu, but they didn't realize until they'd both experienced that this might be some kind of symptom. And reading this in the post-COVID world, of course, this rings a bell. Folks not being able to know, what is a symptom of this illness? I'm still tired 2 months later. Is that because of that? Or is something else going on, this brain fog?
Right.
I've heard that the COVID vaccine will make your DNA get too hot.
Oh, come
What?
on. That doesn't make any sense.
I thought I had this thing turned off. Hold on. I'm starting to have second thoughts about this AI robot.
Starting to. But these guys are actually growing a lot of hair.
The narrator says to the doctor, oh, I had my flu a month ago and the same thing's been happening to me. I've always felt like a sissy because of not having any hair on my torso to speak of. Now I've got a crop that's almost long enough to braid. It's a lot of hair.
Yeah.
The doctor examines him, but he didn't find anything except a lot of hair. He took samples of everything he could think of course. I'd given up wearing underwear because it itched. And anyway, the hair was warm enough to make it unnecessary, even in a New York January.
Wow.
See, he references January, so this story is especially relevant today.
There you go.
In January. Mm-hmm. In fact, I thought, why don't we make the whole month January? And we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast.
Oh, exciting. I don't know why I'm feigning. I knew we were going to do that.
You did. You knew. We discussed it.
A few months later, we find out that old Dr. Fogarty got the flu and now has a lot of body hair as well. By this time, Pat's girlfriend, not the one he's currently married to, also has extreme body hair and is very upset about it.
My girlfriend asked me whether I could explain how it was she was getting hairy. I could see that the poor girl was pretty badly cut up about it, because obviously her chances of catching a good man would be reduced by her growing a pelt like a bear or a gorilla. That's just some premium early 20th century writing there.
Dr. Fogarty, unfortunately, passes away, and Dr. Oliveira asked Pat to help him investigate this phenomenon as his assistant.
We are going to find out about this hair business.
As Oliveira and Pat investigate the case files, Pat decides to invest in companies that make hair removal products.
And that's the B story here that elevates it a bit more. This great change has come, and people have to deal with how it affects their dating lives, their professional lives, how they wear their clothes, for good or bad. But also, is there some profit to be made?
It becomes clear that everybody who's contracted the flu has also started growing a lot of hair. Pat says his girlfriend is so self-conscious about her hair that she doesn't go out anymore.
Which gives them plenty of time to get to work on a solution.
Oliveira experiments on animals, hairless chihuahuas, guinea pigs, rats, but he doesn't turn up any answers. The flu spreads and more people get it. The press is blowing up about it and dubbing the condition hyperpilosity.
Pilosity just means having hair, so hyperpilosity.
As this condition spreads, more and more people are not going out. The author attributes it to women being embarrassed about their excessive body hair. However, the furry community is going wild.
That's not true. That's not in here. But I did think about it as once you threw that in, I go, would the furries be happy about this? Growing a lot of hair suddenly? I don't know if they would.
Oh.
Because there's a lot of investment that's gone into that costume.
That's true.
Which would be extra hot now if you had your own fur.
Boy.
And also, if everybody's hairy, then it's not really special anymore. It's not really unique
Right.
or kinky. I liked this bit. It says, I noticed one funny little item in the paper to the effect that the filming of Tarzan and the Octopus Men had been called off because the actors were supposed to go running around in G-strings. The company had found they had to clip and shave the whole cast all over every few days if they didn't want the actors and the gorillas confused.
The self-consciousness of the condition is leading people to not get married.
Society is being rocked by the effects of this virus.
But Pat's stock in the anti-hair products is blowing up.
His roommate Bert, though, doesn't think the gains are going to last. Maybe you and Oliveira will lick this business and maybe not, Bert says. I'm betting that you won't. And if I win, the stocks that I've bought will be doing famously long after your depilatories are forgotten. Depilatories being, hair removal products.
People are feeling ashamed and staying indoors. The clothing market tanks because people are buying fewer outfits. The cotton planters beg Congress to do something, but what can they do?
This bit kind of killed me. You couldn't hear anything on the radio in the building where I lived because of the interference from the big, powerful electric clippers that everybody had installed and kept going all the time. Just the idea of everybody just shaving constantly nonstop is pretty funny. It's this society of reluctant werewolves.
Pat and Oliveira work night and day as the world gets more chaotic. Pat's roommate Bert, however, is doing well. He's convinced this model, who he's been pursuing for a while, to marry him. Her modeling career dried up as the whole fashion industry has taken a nosedive.
He never would have scored her, but now that she's hairy, she's in his league. She's Shaggy and Bert's making Shagginade.
Oh, God. Congress passes a bill that offers $1 million to anyone who could find a cure. As spring turns into summer, it gets really hot, and men stop wearing shirts. The ones who insist on wearing shirts sometimes pass out from the heat. Even police officers are going shirtless and wearing shorts. There's an incident at the Bronx Zoo where a gorilla escapes from her cage, but nobody notices her for a long time since everyone is hairy and shirtless.
For a gorilla to escape from the zoo and for zero shenanigans to occur as a result in the 1930s is perhaps the most shocking development in this story.
The Japanese Empire, it says, which is still a thing when the story was written, is taking a terrible hit on the silk industry since nobody is wearing it.
In this future of the 1970s, the Japanese Empire still exists, as you say, but because of this crash in the silk market, it becomes, it says, a communist state. This is the kind of story that focuses more on that noise from the shaving razors than on these far-flung implications for society, but it is still in there as a sentence here and there. And again, those economic concerns that come with change. It says stockings were just quaint things that our ancestors had worn, like cocked hats and periwigs. And I think this is the fear that is always there with technology. What work is going to go away? Should you protect it somehow, even though it can be replaced by automation? Can Congress do anything and keep the buggy whip, people in business?
Right.
Or are these casualties we kind of just have to let happen as a society?
Pat and Oliveira work tirelessly to find a cure while the world changes. Oliveira promises to share the $1 million reward for Pat's hard work. The papers are saying that all of this was just a commie plot. So people in Russia don't have all this body hair as well? I assume they do. As the summer comes to an end, the research finally slows down. Pat has to return to his studies, and Oliveira has to return to teaching. Congress tries to pass a law to save the cotton industry by saying that people's body hair is a commodity?
Yeah, because sometimes it is. You can sell your hair, I suppose. But this is a great example of a clever workaround in government. The Congress says, if you cross a state line and you have a heavy pelt of hair, you're wearing that commodity. That's interstate commerce. So now you're under the jurisdiction of the federal government, et cetera, and we can insist that you get clipped. It's the government trying to strong-arm people into clipping all their hair off to keep things how it used to be.
A limited version of the law is passed, and people in government service and the military must clip their body hair. The story touches upon the race issue with Black Americans. It says that all this upheaval leads to a revolt that, as part of the settlement for some fighting, African Americans are given land. With their land, they don't do as well as they thought they would, but they do better than the white Southerners thought they would. It's interesting how this race perspective from 1938 seems now.
I think by saying that they didn't do as well as they thought they would, but they did better than their detractors thought they would. That's a way of saying they're just people.
Yeah.
And then it says, boy, just let a white man visiting their territory get uppity and see what happens to him. They won't take any lip. And that language, uppity, is so loaded towards black Americans. But here he shows you that when it's reversed in terms of a power structure, that the black Americans use uppity against the whites. Basically saying these are normal people, and if the power structure is different, you're at the disadvantage. It has nothing to do with their race. So it's, I think, somewhat forward in terms of perspective at the time.
The textile companies have a big ad campaign saying, "Don't be a hairy ape," with a couple of male swimmers, one hairy with a girl being grossed out by him, and another with a smooth man that she just can't get enough of. But this backfires. People are tired of being told what to do and where, and being a nude, hairy person is really awesome.
That was interesting. People don't like being told what to do. It feels sometimes like advertising is so powerful. Ads and television and film, they can pull these levers and create some aspirations or maybe inspire some shame. But here we see that if it's really going against what people want, it doesn't matter at all. Outright telling people how to behave can have the opposite effect, as a matter of fact. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. It says we became a nation of confirmed near nudists, just as did everybody else sooner or later. The one drawback to real nudism was the fact that, unlike marsupials, man hasn't any natural pockets. So we compromised between the hair, the need for something to hold fountain pens, money, and so forth, and our traditional ideas of modesty by adopting an up-to-date version of the Scottish sporran.
To me, that's the turning point for me as a reader, too, because I'm going, wow, I don't know how I'd feel about that, just suddenly getting hairy and hairy. And then they bring this up and you go, oh, everybody just kind of looks like Scottish Wookiees now. That's kind of great.
Well, Chewbacca had his little satchel, on the
exactly.
side. Yeah, so you got to carry
That's
his
the
keys.
world. This is just Kashyyyk now.
As winter rolls around, the flu spreads, and now pretty much everybody has body hair. By May of 1972, Olivera and Pat are finally getting somewhere. They notice that test tube babies grow hair later than naturally conceived children. Now, remember, this is all science fiction because the first test tube baby wasn't born until 1978. The babies who are kept in quarantine never develop the excess body hair. But keeping a baby in quarantine, of course, is damn near impossible.
The implication being that without natural parents, the flu isn't passed on from them to the infant. But any contact, even with just the natural air, and they will catch it.
Yeah.
So only under extreme sterility can they be kept from this happening.
And nobody wants to do that to their kid.
No, of course not. Well, there's just, you can't.
Yeah. It seems that a self-perpetuating protein molecule causes hyperpilosity. Olivera needs a large data set to determine the protein combination, but he doesn't have a big enough one. So Olivera works out a method for counting proteins, which we find out later is the only real thing Olivera got from all of this research.
His methodology ended up being the thing that won for him.
Yeah.
From this process. And then there's a few paragraphs of protein jargon, but essentially what they discover in all of this is that humans used to be very hairy, and a protein molecule got messed up. And as a result of that, humans lost their hair. That was actually the first virus. The loss of the hair was the first thing that went wrong. And Olivera explains, well, our ancestors shiver a little and then learned to cover themselves with animal skins to keep warm and also to keep fire. And so the march of civilizations, it is commence. Basically, we just adapted to losing our hair. And those adaptations to not having hair led us to discover fire. And as a result of discovering fire, all the technology that followed after, our whole civilization is because we lost our hair back then. Losing our pelts was the best thing to happen to us. But this new virus actually fixes the initial mistake in the protein molecules, so we're just reverting to how we were before that change is actually what's happening.
Olivera develops a risky treatment that combines drugs and a high-frequency electromagnetic fever to reintroduce the beta protein that inhibits hair growth. Like a chump, Olivera tests it on himself, almost dies, but becomes as hairless as he was before. He discovered a cure.
But then our real surprise came, and it wasn't a pleasant one.
And here is the twist. Olivera and Pat think everybody is going to do backflips, but after their announcement, nobody gives a poo. They have some minor interest from papers, but it isn't front page news.
While they were so busy researching, they didn't notice that culture had completely changed around them.
They go to the department head, Wheelock, and tell him that they want to start a clinic for treatment. Wheelock is like, nah. I love my white hair. 6-inch long pelt that I have that covers my entire body. And most people are really into their hair now. So they decide, okay, we're going to approach some other people, but they get the same response. People have gotten used to this new norm. At least they can still get that $1 million prize, right? Turns out Congress put an expiration date on that offer, and Oliveira was 3 weeks past the due date. They get nothing!
And that's the inside story of the Great Change, or at least of one aspect thereof. That's how it happens that when we today speak of a platinum blonde movie star, we aren't referring to her scalp hair alone, but the beautiful silvery pelt that covers her from crown to ankle. There was just one more incident. Bert Kafka had me up to his place to dinner a few nights later, after I'd told him and his wife about Oliveira's and my troubles. He asked how I'd made out on that depilatory manufacturer's stock I'd bought. I noticed those stocks are back about where they started from before the change, he added. Didn't make anything to speak of, I told him. About the time they started to slide down from their peak, I was too busy working for Roman to pay much attention to them. When I finally did look them up, I was just able to unload with a few cents profit per share. How did you do on those stocks you were so mysterious about last year? Maybe you noticed my new car as you came in? Asked Bert with a grin. That's them. Or rather, it. There was only one. Jones and Galloway Company. What did Jones and Galloway make? I never heard of them. They make... Here, Bert's grin looked as if it were gonna run around his head and meet behind. Curry combs. And that was that? Here's Carl with the beer now. It's your deal, isn't it, Hannibal?
They're playing cards with Hannibal Lecter. That's the twist at the end of the story. No, that's the end of the story. Hannibal's just one of their poker playing friends. So, people adapted to the change, and folks who saw where that was going to go made money on it.
Yep.
And I guess the big obvious thing in this story is that people are adaptable, surprisingly adaptable to changes that come around. We can't predict those changes, but we can predict that folks are just going to get used to whatever the new normal is after a change.
Yeah.
I think also there's a story here about how side effects often become the remembered effects of any process. This hyperpilosity causes revolutions, we see.
All right, yeah.
Losing our hair to begin with led to all of the technology we have. Inadvertently.
Yeah.
That model getting hairy led her to marry the roommate whom she otherwise wouldn't have considered when she had more options. And in this way, the failures are more interesting because they lead off in odd directions. Those flying machines didn't help us get anywhere, but they did help us have a good concrete example of failure to show in documentaries. So,
Yes.
There you go. How did you feel about the story overall, though?
Oh, well, it was all right. It was interesting, amusing, but it's nothing I would write home about. It didn't blow my mind.
I will say that, I felt the same way. I enjoyed the concept, and I saw in the telling of it what the mode was. That it was poker, intermission, jokey, kind of crass. I think there might have been a more interesting way to tell the story and a shorter way to tell it, perhaps, as well, because the point was made pretty quickly. But I can see that this is doing what a good strange story should do, which is it's taking a big assumption, a little bit of magic, and it's re-showing us society.
Yeah.
And that's clearly what it does. So I enjoyed it from that perspective a lot.
It's an all right story. That's it. It's all right.
It's an all right story. It's a really killer concept. You could replace it with anything happening to people. Their noses getting big, their ears getting large, they get reptilian skin, whatever.
Yeah.
Tell the same story. So it's just a device to tell us that folks can get used to anything.
Yeah.
I did, however, think, I wonder if there's some more hair stories out there that we could cover. And we asked for some suggestions, and we got a lot from a lot of folks. So here's the twist of this podcast episode. It's actually 2024 still for us. We recorded this early. So 2025 is just a bit of futurism to us, the same way that 1971 was to Sprague de Camp when he wrote this.
That's true.
We're going to go through that stack of stories and decide what we're doing for the rest of the month. We'll put in the show notes what those things are.
I want to thank our reader, James Holloway, once again gracing us with his beautiful voice. Please check out his podcast, Monster Man, where he talks about all types of monsters in the best possible way. Also, he's got many a pamphlet that I own, I think almost all of them, and they're great. So I highly recommend those as well.
I also want to thank our stakers who make these free shows possible, and I'm going to start by thanking Dr. Eric S. Vallone.
I'd like to thank Ben A.
Richard Wolf, thank you.
I want to thank the king of all the snakes.
Jay Robinson, thank you.
Alistair Brooks, thank you.
Shmail Khan, thank you.
Christopher Rosser, thank you.
It's a Ghost, thank you.
Hey, John Morgan, thank you.
Angelina Brown, thank you.
And lastly, I'd like to thank Eric Gordon.
I also want to thank Lynn, also known as Al, our new AI robot. I'm sure that this bit is going to go very far into the future. We'll see how it tests.
Oh, wow.
We're happy to be here with all our terrible jokes and with our boxed up robots. That's all we have for this week. We'll be back with more January. For now, I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey, wishing you all a Happy New Year.
Strange studies of strange stories.